right, everyone, we're going to be moving into our next section here. This is around communications in Microsoft 365. We're going to jump right in here. When we are looking at communications, what is it? Or more importantly, what would be the purpose for it? So again, in organizations, especially larger organizations, we need to be able to broadcast out information. So it's a way of broadcasting news and publishing information to end users. So we need to be able to get to them. Think of this almost as internal or even corporate type marketing. Okay. So there's a lot that goes along with this here because this is we'll say a very typical gap that most of my customers, they run into is because communications to the end users is very difficult. And I'm not just talking about IT communications. That's just a section. I'm talking about other types of communications as well, news. So, hey, so-and-so is the new chief executive officer, or, hey, we are finally allowed to announce that we are merging with another company. How do you handle those types of communication? This is for internal communications though, okay? So external is through, traditionally we would see it through social media or, newspapers, whatever it is, those types of scenarios. And that's fine. But we're talking about internally here. How do we broadcast internal news and get that to the end users? So as we have really done in the past, we're going to look at the legacy side of things and we're going to look at some of the modern side of things. So legacy network options, the de facto way is through email. I can't tell you, even nowadays I still get email that is, so much for my company or for other people's, that they say that here's all the news for happening this week and here's all the stuff that's coming. Or some of my favorite, this is one that happens everywhere. IT will communicate and say, hey, this website is going to be down for this period of time. And while it is down, you will not have access to it during these hours. And always, you get some sort of help desk call where, hey, I can't access this site. And that's because the first question should be, did you read the email that went out? And they'll say, oh, no, I didn't. So that happens all the time. Email is the de facto way of blasting out information right now, but email is probably the most inefficient way. It's the easiest way. We can just send out a mass emailer, and that's cool. But again, the problem here is that we're not really catering to the audience. The audience just gets a big blast of information, and really, do we care about it? The answer for the most part is probably no. So we don't necessarily care too much about it. So what do we do with it? We delete it, we ignore it, and we don't consume the information inside. Well, that's very typical, and we see that in a lot of organizations. Intranets, this is another one. This could be through SharePoint or it could be through another corporate-owned intranet application. There's a whole bunch of them that are out there, of course. But really, when we're looking at like intranets here, this is, again, a website that would have all of the news on it. The problem with intranets, okay, I won't say it's a problem, but here's the caveat that you got to really think about when it comes to intranets, is intranets are very much a single direction type of communication. And we're going to talk about that here. And it very well can be useful. However, we need to be able to do other things as well. So we have intranet where we would have a site that says, hey, here's the merger and acquisition information, or here's the new policy and procedure. You would have to go to it in order to obtain that information. So again, we would have to go to the intranet. So that means we would have to browse it and be browsing on a regular occasion. Because the intranet site is not going to tell me when new things are coming down the pipeline. That's the key there. So when an intranet is got some information on it, we have to look and see when the new things pop up, and we have to be able to browse it. So again, not a problem really, but it is inefficient. So this is where we bridge into a secondary, and this is something that we see a lot as well, social media applications. So in this instance here, this could be Facebook, this could be Twitter. There's lots of different things on here. Yammer maybe, but I'll be honest with you, since we're talking legacy, that's probably not really in the cards. But again, there's a lot of other other applications that exist that are kind of social media-y. I just kind of throw that into a large bucket, but this is another one of those instances where, the user would have like a Facebook, and they would have like an internal Facebook group, and they would go to the group to get information as well. So yeah, that's certainly an option as well. That's certainly something we have seen. One of the things I have seen a lot more of as well are webinars, town halls, recordings. These have been around for quite some time, and the method has always been lots of different ways. Really, it depends. I've been working with a lot of government entities where they do their town halls or they do their meetings and such, and they will record them, and then you can watch them on the site later. That's one reason, but maybe you have a State of the Union address type scenario where, we have to, we talk about all the things that are coming down, and we have executives come and look at it and talk about it, and then we have, whatever it may be. So I think we all understand essentially what these webinars and town halls are. Sure. Emergency notifications. So this is another method, and I think this is actually quite a useful one, because remember, in emergency situations, this could range from lots of different things like weather canceling or a pipe burst somewhere in a building and we want to let everybody know, or even those scary ones where it's a potential bomb threat or something even worse. So looking at those is, how do we get that to people's eyes? Really, that's what we have to do. We have to get it to their eyeballs. So a lot of times we see SMS dialers, we see auto dialers, SMS blasts, we see push notifications for potential applications and such. There's a lot of different ways of doing this here, but we really have to be careful with these here too, because there are a lot of legalities, but also these can get quite expensive, the emergency notification systems, because generally it's pay per message or pay per dial, whatever it may be. So again, with all that being said, just things that we have to be aware of. These are ways that we used to do things, and the way of doing them now is still very much, within these realms here, but there are more effective ways of doing it. So we start looking at the modern network options here. We have SharePoint Online, okay? And again, we've been talking a lot about SharePoint here. So, this is the them portion, okay? This is really around the idea of the communication sites. So remember, we talked about team sites already, which is really around collaboration and such. But the communication sites, these are the newer, we'll say the more, I won't say newer, excuse me, but the more broad spectrum here around communication. We have Yammer communities, which kind of fits in the us. These are aggregated communities that are open to anybody. You can just jump in and get information because it's things that you are passionate about, that things that you care about. So you jump into these communities here and you start seeing and getting information on it. Now we're going to look at both SharePoint and Yammer in this particular lab here. So hold tight on the way it actually looks and feels, because we'll get to that. Microsoft Teams, this is another big one here. Microsoft Teams fits into this category as well. And we'll see here, as remember, as what we said is that, we have SharePoint Online, we have Yammer communities, and we have Teams. So Teams fits so many categories, and we've talked about it already a ton. We're going to have our next discussion is going to be specifically and solely around Teams. And so we're going to look at that, but here are typically the way that we're going to be communicating things. Now, there still are emergency broadcasts. There still are other, those types of communications. Those are still around. There's no doubt about it. Webinars, town halls, and everything. But now they're most of the time done through Teams. It fits into that Teams bucket. Same thing with, some of the other things that we talked about, the social media stuff. That's going to generally go over to Yammer. But from the Teams perspective, this is another scenario where we have the emergency broadcast as well. So this is just another avenue, because again, remember, we want to get to eyeballs. So there's several different applications and services that are out there, one of which is now called Single Wire. And it is a fantastic tool here, but it's just a bunch of API calls. And it's really cool because what you can do is you can feed it in there and say, hey, a pipe burst in X location, don't go in today. Or hey, the roads are terrible from the snow, don't come in because the city's under a snow ban, something like that. those are things, but how do we get those? Yeah, we can do SMS. We can do auto dialers. We can actually do Teams pings. We can do Yammer community posts. We can do SharePoint online banners. We could do all of that with a couple clicks of a button, which I think is a very, very powerful tool. So it's a way of kind of taking that communication and broadcasting in multiple different locations. Really cool stuff that we can do there with it. But again, we're using these three main tools here for the communication side. So let's break down what is a communication site. So SharePoint communication sites, these are going to be our intranet sites. What is the purpose of these here? Well, they're really for publishing content and news to the organization, as well as record information. Now, I'm going to hold off on record here in just a second, but it's publishing content and news to the organization. So again, we want to, hey, we have a, I don't know, like a charity drive going, and we want everyone to get involved, and we want to put that information on it. Click here for more information, and it takes you to essentially a website, and it's a SharePoint site. So you get to it and you get information about it, and it looks cool. We can do news publications as well. We can do where a communication site there will have a hey, here's the new CEO. Here's some information about them. Here's a video that they recorded for you. And you can watch all of those things. And they're integrated inside of SharePoint. So again, it's a single location. But the thing about SharePoint is that it's catered to you. Okay, we can have it catered to you. Now, what I mean by you is that based off of your user account. So SharePoint sites cannot be accessed from the outside world. Okay, those used to be things. They're called extranets, but they don't exist anymore. They're much different now. It's really through the idea of guests and external collaboration. But when somebody comes in, they have to authenticate against your tenant. Now, when you authenticate against a tenant, then you type in a username and password. And that username and password, depending on your group or whatever, you may get different content that you see on your page. So you may have content more relative to accounting, or more information relative to HR or IT, whatever it is. You can get that information to you. Now, again, looking at the record information, bringing that back up. So what is a record? Well, a record is essentially approved, we'll say approved piece of information that is as it stands. So think of a record as a policy and procedure that is the final approved policy and procedure. That is a record. Anything that is outside of that is not approved, but you may have, the next iteration, but it has not fully become a record yet. So a record inside of SharePoint is a little bit of a different scenario here, because it actually has some pieces around where you make it read-only, and it can only last for a period of time, and those types of things. We'll get onto that much more when we talk into the next section around compliance and all of that. But really, a record inside of SharePoint is a big deal when something gets marked as a record. Okay, so you can't really do much with it once it becomes a record, and it's designed to be that way. Now, these are really SharePoint communication sites, are really single direction communication. Now, what I mean by that is I have to go out of my way to get it. There's nothing natively inside of SharePoint that will say, here's the new stuff. If I'm just working on my computer, I don't get any pop-ups or anything like that. Well, that's where we have to rely on other types of communication streams. So it could be email. Email certainly could be a thing. And it could be a very short and simple email where it just says, here's some new updates that have happened, and they'll have links to the SharePoint site. That's another thing that you can do. And that's a little bit more effective than a giant wall of text, which happens a lot. But that is what it is. But again, I have to go out of my way to get it. Okay, so that's why I always call it a single directional communication. Here's probably one of the more important parts of it. Just as we saw here, a lot of times in the past, especially with some of these corporate intranet in a box type scenarios here, is that it's difficult to delegate this. But SharePoint is actually quite easy. So the communication site would be created by IT and then delegated out. So remember the model that we looked off of inside of SharePoint, where we have owner, we have viewer, and then essentially the editor. So we have those same type of scenarios on here where we can have different people doing the communication. And the thing that's great about SharePoint here is it's actually quite easy to work through. It is designed for people outside of IT to to post news. Because again, IT should not be handling this information here. This is not something that IT should be doing. The communications team or individual departments, whatever it may be based on the organization, they're going to have more information, and they're going to have more, we'll say, motivation to make this information available to people. But they also can make it more, we'll say, fancy. We'll just say that. It looks nicer. As that we start delegating this out to communication site people, they're not technical people, but just give them the ability to create news posts and such, and then they can do these posts across the organization. So again, very easy to do, and that is the purpose of SharePoint. And we'll see how we can create a communication site. Now, again, just a forewarning here with the communication site, I am no UI UX person. So typically what we do here is we're just going to use it right out of the box. There's some nice templates and such that Microsoft has available for us. But if you want it to be a little bit more branded, where you want to fit your color pattern and whatever type of mood and motif that you have as an organization, you can do that. Now, my skills really kind of stop when it comes to that design, the UI UX design, because I'm just not very good at that. But like I said, we'll be using some of the lookbook, as it's called, which are very easy to work with. The next piece that we have here are Yammer communities. Now, these are ways for engagement, but more importantly, it is bi-directional communication. A lot of people call Yammer communities a corporate social media, and in reality they are, but they're also another great way of being able to communicate to people. The reason why we call them bi-directional communications is, well, a couple different reasons. So we have a whole list of communities that are available to us. We join them. We, as the consumer, opt in on these. And a lot of, just to give you an example, some ideas of communities would be, we have our traditional department level things, which are great, that's cool. But in this instance here, we may also have things that are not department related. Maybe, women in engineering, or, people who like to grill, just things like that. And we would have communities and talk with inside of it and have content relative to that. So those are things that I enjoy and I want to know more about. So I enroll myself into that community there, and the information goes both directions. So I enroll myself, and then we have new posts that are coming out there. So I get them alerted to myself. Okay. And we're going to work on how we can actually unify all of this, but I'll get to that in just a second. But I get an alert that, hey, there's been a new post here, or you may get your aggregated feed that here's everything you missed from yesterday, whatever it may be. But here's the cool thing about it is that we can track engagement. So engagements, likes, shares, again, very social media type things, which are great because these allow us to be able to see who's actually interacting with our posts. Who cares about these? Well, some people do, some people don't. We can get a little bit more creative inside of here too, where we can share forms or polls. We can share other things inside of Yammer as well, and we'll look at all of that. A lot of really cool things that we can do there, of course, but the idea behind this one here is that it is also really designed for delegation outside of IT. This is something that is, outside of IT. We don't necessarily are going to be publishing things. No, these are going to be the people inside of the communities that are going to be publishing them. Other people can put posts out there, and that's the thing about it too, is that I could potentially post, anybody can post on there and just ask a question. A very common one I see is for new hire community. I jump in the new hire, or I get it assigned to me, and I just say, hey, I got a quiz question. Where do I go for blah? And then I go over to it, and somebody can respond to me very easily there as well. So again, it's a communication. It's bi-directional. We have engagement. We have interaction with posts and such. It is a corporate social media. That's really what you can post it as. A lot of social media facets around it. And then finally, it's really the information that we put inside of it is news, it's publishing content, but it's really about information we want to get interacting. Now, the cool part about Yammer and SharePoint is they're not necessarily two different pieces there. They're really two sides of the same coin. Because Yammer, we have our posts inside of Yammer, or excuse me, inside of SharePoint, we have our content, the news article or whatever it is that we're trying to do. Well, one of the native features that we can do inside of SharePoint is its direct integration with Yammer is we can post it and broadcast it right to a Yammer community. And then we can blast that out to the group, and then everybody can interact with it. Oh, this is cool. How cool. And they can comment, like, and share and such with other people as well. So that's really what it's about, is that we are publishing the news content inside of SharePoint. We're using Yammer to push it out to the organization or whatever group and section of people it may be for engagement. So this is a way of a more modern approach. And this, as I said, is very similar to the way we do quite a lot of different communications and social media things on the outside world. We all have kind of a Facebook or a Twitter or a whatever, whatever those are nowadays. People have those, and it works in a very similar manner. So this is something that is, from a corporate standpoint, great because I am keeping it inside of my warehouse. And my warehouse essentially is Microsoft 365 here, but I'm keeping it under my roof, so to speak. Now, one of the things that we're going to start working through here in the lab is we're going to start, we're going to play with Yammer, we're going to play with SharePoint, and then as we start jumping into the next section, which is going to be around Teams, we're going to see how Teams really ties this all together. Okay, so all of these things here, Microsoft's vision to make Teams a single pane of glass around communication, collaboration, we'll see how that all ties together. But we're going to look at the individual pieces here around SharePoint and around Yammer. So that's the next piece we're going to jump into. We're going to jump into the lab here, and we're going to start playing around with Yammer's communities and SharePoint pages and such, and start looking through those. So that's it for this particular lecture here. We'll see you over on the next one. Thank you.